The voicemail sat in my inbox for 3 days before I could bring myself to listen to it. When I finally pressed play, my mother's voice cut through the speaker sharp and venomous like always. "I don't know why you keep trying, Natalie. Honestly, it would have been easier if you'd never been born. Maybe then I could have had the life I deserved." There was a pause, then a bitter laugh. "Don't bother coming for Thanksgiving. We've already made plans, and trust me, they don't include you." The message ended with a click. No goodbye. No softening. Just that hollow silence that felt louder than her words. I sat on the edge of my bed in my small Portland apartment, staring at the phone screen as if it might apologize on her behalf. It never did. That message became the turning point, though I didn't realize it yet. It became the thing that made me decide to show up anyway, to plan something so undeniably thoughtful that even Barbara Brooks couldn't ignore it. I was wrong, of course, but sometimes you have to lose everything before you understand what you were never meant to carry in the first place. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. 3 weeks before Thanksgiving, I sat at my kitchen table with a blank calendar page and a blue pen. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional sound of footsteps from the unit above. I drew a small star in the corner of November 23rd. Not because I was naive enough to believe everything would suddenly be perfect, but because I needed something to work toward. Something that felt like hope, even if it was manufactured. This Thanksgiving was going to be different. I wouldn't be the afterthought, the obligation, the name mentioned last in conversation. I would be the center, the one who brought everyone together. I told myself that if I could just create the right environment, the right atmosphere, maybe they'd finally see me the way I'd always wanted to be seen, as someone worth showing up for. I researched restaurants in Bend for hours, scrolling through reviews and photos until my eyes blurred. I needed somewhere that felt special but not pretentious. Somewhere warm. The Riverside Inn appeared on my screen just after midnight. The photos showed a stone fireplace, wooden beams across the ceiling, and floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the Deschutes River. The private dining room seated 8 comfortably. It was perfect. I called the next morning and reserved it without hesitation, even though the deposit made my stomach twist. The woman on the phone had a kind voice. She asked if it was a special occasion. I told her it was a family reunion of sorts. She said that sounded lovely. I wanted to believe her. The menu took me another 2 days to finalize. I avoided turkey because my mother always complained about how dry it was, how much work it required. Instead, I chose herb-crusted salmon, roasted root vegetables with honey glaze, wild rice pilaf, and a selection of artisan breads. For dessert, I ordered 3 different pies: marionberry, pumpkin praline, and salted caramel apple. I wanted everyone to have a favorite. I wanted there to be abundance, generosity, the kind of meal that people remembered. When I confirmed the order, I gave them my credit card information and tried not to think about how many shifts at the bookstore it had taken to save this much. It didn't matter. This mattered. The invitations were next. I bought heavy cardstock from a stationery shop downtown, the kind with a slight texture that felt expensive under your fingers. I sat at my table one evening after work, writing each one by hand. My handwriting wasn't elegant, but it was legible, and I pressed down hard enough that the words felt permanent. "Dear Mom and Dad," I wrote, though the salutation felt strange and formal. "I'm hosting Thanksgiving dinner this year at the Riverside Inn in Bend. It would mean the world to me if you join." I listed the date, the time, and the address. I didn't beg. I didn't apologize for existing. I just invited them. Derek's invitation was simpler. I knew he'd go wherever our parents went, so I didn't waste words. Amanda's was a little longer. We'd been close once, back when we were kids, and she used to follow me around the backyard. But somewhere in her teenage years, she learned that aligning with Mom and Dad was easier than defending me. Still, I wrote to her like I believed she might remember that version of herself. "I hope you'll come," I wrote at the end. "I miss you." It felt pathetic the moment I sealed the envelope, but I mailed it anyway. Aunt Rachel's invitation was the only one that felt easy to write. She lived in Sisters, a tiny mountain town west of Bend, in a cottage that always smelled like cinnamon and wet paint. Rachel was my mother's older sister, though they hadn't spoken in years. I didn't know the full story, only that Barbara referred to her as dramatic and irresponsible, which usually meant Rachel had refused to fall in line. I'd kept in touch with her sporadically over the years, mostly through birthday cards and the occasional phone call. Her invitation was simple. "I'm trying something," I wrote. "I'd love it if you were there." I didn't explain further. I didn't need to. Rachel understood the spaces between words better than anyone I knew. I mailed all 5 invitations on a Tuesday morning before my shift. The postal worker, a middle-aged man with wire-rimmed glasses, smiled as I handed them over. "Someone's got a party coming up," he said. I nodded and forced a smile back. Something like that. As I walked out of the post office, I felt the weight of what I'd just done settle into my chest. There was no taking it back now. I'd reached out. I'd made myself vulnerable. All I could do was wait. The waiting was the worst part. I checked my email obsessively, refreshing my inbox even when I knew nothing new would appear. I kept my phone on the table during meals, during showers, during the moments right before sleep. I told myself I wasn't desperate, but the tightness in my chest said otherwise. For days after I mailed the invitations, Amanda texted, "Got your invite. Not sure if I can make it, but thanks for thinking of me." It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. I held on to that. Derek didn't respond at all. Neither did my parents. A week passed. Then another. I started checking the mail for a card, a note, anything that acknowledged I'd reached out. Nothing came. Aunt Rachel called on a Sunday afternoon. Her voice crackled through the line, warm and slightly out of breath, like she'd just come in from a walk. "Natalie, honey, I got your invitation. I'm absolutely coming. Wouldn't miss it." I felt something unclench in my chest. "Thank you," I said, and my voice cracked despite my best effort. She paused. "Have they responded yet?" I didn't need to ask who she meant. "No," I said. She sighed long and heavy. "That doesn't mean they won't show," she said gently. "But if they don't, you're still going to have a beautiful evening. You hear me?" I nodded even though she couldn't see me. "I hear you." Thanksgiving morning arrived cold and clear. I woke up before my alarm, the sky outside still bruised with pre-dawn darkness. I made coffee and stood by the window watching Portland wake up below me. Somewhere out there my family was waking up too. Maybe they were talking about me. Maybe they'd forgotten entirely. I showered and dressed carefully. I chose a deep green sweater dress, simple but elegant, and spent longer than usual on my hair. I wanted to look put together. I wanted to look like someone who deserved to be celebrated. The drive to Bend took just over 2.5 hours. I left early, too early, because I couldn't stand sitting in my apartment any longer. The highway stretched out ahead of me, cutting through forests of pine and stretches of high desert. I turned the radio off halfway through. The silence felt necessary. I arrived at the Riverside Inn just after 2 in the afternoon. Dinner wasn't until 6, but I told them I'd come early to finalize details. The hostess greeted me with the same warm voice I'd heard on the phone weeks ago. "Everything's ready for you," she said. "Let me show you the room." The private dining area was even lovelier than I'd imagined. The fireplace crackled softly in the corner. The table was set with white linens, navy blue napkins folded into perfect triangles, and small arrangements of eucalyptus and winter berries at each place setting. 8 chairs, 8 plates, 8 glasses catching the afternoon light. It looked like a place where families came together. It looked like the kind of scene you'd see in a holiday movie. I stood there for a long moment just taking it in. I had brought place cards with me, handwritten the night before. I set them out carefully, my hands steadier than I expected. Barbara and Richard at one end, Derek and Amanda across from each other, Aunt Rachel near the middle, and me at the head of the table. Not because I wanted to be in charge, but because the event coordinator had suggested it. "The host usually sits there," she'd said. It anchored the table. It made sense. I adjusted the cards one last time, making sure they were aligned, making sure everything looked intentional. The waitress brought out a basket of warm rolls and set it on the table. The smell filled the room, rich and comforting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I thanked her quietly. It was only 3:30. I sat down in my chair and folded my hands on the table. I checked my phone. No messages. I texted Amanda. "On my way, hope to see you soon." I added a heart emoji, then immediately regretted it. Felt too eager. Too desperate. But it was already sent. I set my phone face down and stared at the empty seats around me. They'll come, I told myself. They'll walk through that door, and this will all make sense. I just needed to wait a little longer. By 5:45, I was standing in the entryway near the hostess stand, pretending to admire a painting on the wall. My heart was doing something erratic in my chest, a stuttering rhythm that made my breath shallow. Any minute now. The hostess smiled at me every time she passed. I smiled back, though my face was starting to ache from holding the expression. At 6, I walked back to the dining room. Still empty. The candles on the table had been lit. They flickered softly, casting shadows across the carefully arranged place settings. I sat down again. I smoothed the napkin on my lap. I checked my phone. Nothing. At 6:15 I walked outside. The air was sharp and cold, biting against my skin. I pulled my coat tighter and dialed my mother's number. It rang 3 times before she picked up. "Natalie," she said. Her tone was flat, distracted. There was noise in the background. Voices. Laughter. The unmistakable clatter of dishes. "Where are you?" I asked, though I already knew. "We're at Derek's," she said simply. "Your father wasn't feeling up to driving all the way to Bend, and honestly, it just made more sense to stay local." I heard Amanda's voice in the background saying something I couldn't make out, followed by Derek's deeper laugh. My grip tightened on the phone. "I made a reservation," I said. "I planned this." Barbara sighed, the kind of sigh that suggested I was being unreasonable. "I'm sure you did, Natalie. But we didn't confirm, did we? You just assumed we'd drop everything. That's not really fair." Fair. The word hung in the cold air between us. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to explain that fair would have been a phone call, a text, any acknowledgement that I existed. "You could have told me," I said finally. My voice was quieter than I wanted it to be. "Well, I'm telling you now," she said. "Look, we're about to sit down to eat. I'll talk to you later, okay?" She hung up before I could respond. I stood there on the sidewalk staring at my phone screen. The call had lasted 53 seconds. Inside the restaurant, I could see other families through the windows. A couple laughing over wine. A group of teenagers crowded around a table, passing plates back and forth. An older man cutting into a piece of pie while a woman across from him smiled. Everyone looked like they belonged exactly where they were. I walked back inside. The hostess gave me a sympathetic look but didn't say anything. I returned to the private dining room and sat down. The food would be out soon. I'd already paid for it. 8 servings of herb-crusted salmon. 8 sides of roasted vegetables. 8 slices of pie. The waitress appeared in the doorway, hesitating. "Should I hold off on bringing the courses out?" she asked gently. Her eyes flicked to the empty chairs, then back to me. "No," I said. "Go ahead." She nodded and disappeared. I sat alone at the table, staring at the name cards I'd written so carefully. Barbara, Richard, Derek, Amanda. Each one a small monument to hope. Each one a reminder of how foolish I'd been. The first course arrived. The waitress set a plate in front of me without a word. The salmon was perfectly cooked, the skin crispy and golden. The vegetables glistened with honey glaze. It should have been delicious. I picked up my fork and cut a small piece. I chewed slowly, mechanically. Tasted like nothing. Around me the restaurant hummed with life. I could hear faint music playing, the low murmur of conversation, the occasional burst of laughter. It felt like the world was celebrating something I'd never be invited to. I set my fork down and pressed my palms against the edge of the table. My hands were shaking. I took a breath, then another. I would not cry here. Not in front of strangers. Not over people who had made it abundantly clear that I didn't matter. But then the door opened. I looked up, my heart leaping despite itself. Aunt Rachel stood in the doorway, her coat dusted with snow that must have started falling outside. Her gray hair was pulled back in a loose bun, and her cheeks were flushed from the cold. She saw me sitting alone at the table, saw the empty chairs, and her expression shifted into something fierce and protective. "Oh, honey," she said, crossing the room in 3 long strides. She didn't ask where everyone was. She didn't need to. She pulled out the chair next to mine and sat down, shrugging off her coat. "I'm here," she said firmly. "And I'm starving." The waitress appeared again, looking relieved. "Another place setting?" "Yes, please," Rachel said. "And a glass of red wine." Make it a big one. Despite everything, I felt the corner of my mouth twitch. Thank you for coming, I said quietly. Rachel reached over and squeezed my hand. I wouldn't be anywhere else. We ate slowly, Rachel and I, the kind of slow that had nothing to do with savoring and everything to do with filling the silence. She asked about my job at the bookstore, about the apartment, about whether I'd been hiking lately. Small questions that required small answers. I was grateful for them. They kept me tethered to something ordinary. Something that didn't require me to acknowledge the 7 empty chairs or the carefully written name cards that now felt like accusations. The salmon was excellent, Rachel said, cutting another piece. You have good taste, Natalie. Always have. I nodded, pushing a roasted carrot around my plate. The compliment sat uncomfortably on my shoulders. Good taste felt meaningless when no one else was there to appreciate it. The waitress returned with the wine Rachel had ordered. A generous pour that filled the glass nearly to the rim. Rachel lifted it and tilted it slightly toward me. To family, she said. The real kind. The ones who show up. I didn't have a drink in front of me. Just water in a crystal glass that caught the firelight. I lifted it anyway. We clinked gently, the sound delicate and sad. I took a sip and the water was cold, tasteless, exactly what I deserved. Rachel drank deeply, then set her glass down with a soft thud. They didn't even call, did they? She asked. Her voice wasn't angry, just tired. Like she'd expected this outcome all along. I shook my head. Mom did. After I called her. They're at Derek's. She said Dad wasn't feeling well enough to drive. Rachel's jaw tightened. That's convenient. I didn't want to defend them, but some old instinct rose up anyway. Maybe he really isn't feeling well, I said. Rachel gave me a look, the kind that said she knew better and I should too. Natalie, she said carefully. How many times are you going to make excuses for people who don't make room for you? The question landed heavier than I expected. I stared down at my plate, at the food I'd chosen so carefully, and felt something inside me start to crack. I don't know, I admitted. It was the most honest thing I'd said all night. Rachel reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Her palm was warm, rough in places from years of pottery work. You're allowed to stop, she said. You're allowed to let them go. I nodded, but I wasn't sure I believed her. Letting go required a kind of strength I wasn't sure I had. We finished the main course in relative quiet. The waitress cleared our plates with practiced efficiency, offering us a few moments before dessert. Rachel excused herself to use the restroom, and I was alone again. I pulled out my phone, not because I expected anything, but because I needed something to do with my hands. There was one new message. From Amanda. Sorry I couldn't make it. Hope you're having a nice time. No explanation. No acknowledgement of what it must have felt like to plan all this and be ignored. Just a polite, distant sentence that could have been sent to anyone. I typed and deleted 3 different responses before finally putting the phone face down on the table. There was nothing to say that wouldn't sound desperate or angry, and I didn't want to be either of those things. I wanted to be indifferent. I wanted to not care. But caring was the only thing I seemed capable of. Rachel returned just as the waitress brought out dessert. 3 pies sliced and plated beautifully, with dollops of fresh whipped cream on the side. The marionberry was deep purple, almost black. The pumpkin praline had a golden sheen. The salted caramel apple glistened under the candlelight. It was too much for 2 people, but I'd ordered it for 8. The abundance now felt obscene. The waitress set one of each in front of us. Can I box up the rest for you? She asked gently. I nodded. Yes, thank you. She left and returned a few minutes later with white containers stacked neatly in a bag. Rachel took a bite of the marionberry and closed her eyes. This is incredible, she said. You outdid yourself. I tried a forkful of the pumpkin. It was good. Rich and smooth with just the right amount of spice. But it tasted like failure. We stayed until the restaurant started to empty out. Other families filed past our room, bundled in coats and scarves, their faces flushed with warmth and satisfaction. I watched them go and wondered what it felt like to be part of something so effortless. Rachel insisted on paying the tip, even though I'd already covered the meal. Let me do this, she said. You've done enough. We walked out into the cold together, the snow falling lightly now, dusting the sidewalk and the roof of my car. Rachel pulled me into a hug before I could say goodbye. Her arms were strong, and she smelled like lavender and wood smoke. "You're going to be okay," she whispered into my hair. I wanted to believe her. I held on a little longer than I should have, then pulled back and wiped at my eyes quickly, pretending it was just the cold. "Drive safe," I said. She nodded. "You too, honey. Call me when you get home." The drive back to Portland felt longer than the drive there. The highway was dark, lit only by my headlights and the occasional passing car. I turned the radio on this time, letting someone else's voice fill the silence. A holiday station played old classics, songs about coming home and being together and miracles in the snow. I turned it off after 3 songs. When I finally pulled into my apartment complex, it was nearly 11. The building was quiet, most of the windows dark. I carried the bag of leftover pie up the stairs, my legs heavy and slow. Inside, I set the bag on the counter and stood in the middle of my kitchen, still wearing my coat. The apartment felt smaller than it had that morning. Emptier. I thought about calling Rachel, but I didn't know what I'd say. I thought about texting Amanda, but I'd already said everything I needed to say by showing up in the first place. Instead, I sat on the couch and stared at the dark television screen. My reflection stared back, distorted and dim. I looked tired. I looked like someone who'd spent the evening hoping for something that was never going to come. The next morning, I woke up to a text from my mother. "Hope you had a nice Thanksgiving. We missed you at Derek's." The audacity of it knocked the breath out of me. Missed me. As if I'd been the one who chose not to show. As if I hadn't spent weeks planning, inviting, waiting. I read the message 3 times, each time feeling the anger build hotter in my chest. I started typing a response. "I was at the restaurant you didn't show up to." I deleted it. "You didn't miss me. You forgot I existed." Deleted. "Why do you do this?" Deleted. Finally, I just turned my phone off and threw it onto the bed. I spent the weekend in a fog. I went to work at the bookstore on Friday, restocking shelves and ringing up customers who smiled and asked how my Thanksgiving had been. "Fine," I said every time. It was fine. No one pressed further. On Saturday, I stayed in my apartment and ate leftover pie for breakfast. The Marionberry tasted better the second day, but it still felt like swallowing disappointment. I thought about the empty chairs. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone, casual and dismissive. I thought about Amanda's vague text and Derek's complete silence. And I thought about Rachel, the only person who'd shown up. The only person who'd ever really shown up. Sunday afternoon, Rachel called. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up on the 3rd ring. "Hey," she said. "How are you holding up?" "I'm fine," I said automatically. Rachel was quiet for a moment. "Natalie," she said. "You don't have to be fine with me." The kindness in her voice broke something loose. I started crying quietly at first, then harder. "I don't know why I keep trying," I said through the tears. "I don't know why I thought this time would be different." "Because you're hopeful," Rachel said. "Because you're good. And because you deserved better than what they gave you." I wiped my face with the back of my hand. "What's wrong with me?" I asked. "Nothing," Rachel said firmly. "Nothing is wrong with you." There was a pause, and I heard her take a breath like she was deciding something. "Listen," she said. "Can you come to Sisters next weekend? There's something I need to show you." I didn't ask what it was. I just said yes. The following Saturday, I made the drive back to Central Oregon. The weather was clearer this time, the sky a sharp blue that hurt to look at. Rachel's cottage sat at the end of a gravel road, surrounded by pines and a small garden that had gone dormant for winter. Smoke curled from the chimney. I parked and knocked, and Rachel opened the door within seconds. She was wearing paint-splattered jeans and an oversized flannel, her hair loose around her shoulders. Come in," she said, pulling me inside. The cottage smelled like coffee and cinnamon rolls. The walls were covered in her artwork, abstract landscapes in deep blues and greens. A pottery wheel sat in one corner, surrounded by half-finished bowls and mugs. It felt like stepping into a different world, one where things were made with care and nothing was wasted. Rachel poured us both coffee and sat across from me at the small kitchen table. She didn't make small talk this time. She just looked at me, her expression serious. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I should have told you a long time ago." My stomach tightened. "Okay." She wrapped her hands around her mug. "It's about your mother." "About Barbara." I waited. Rachel took a breath. "You weren't supposed to exist, Natalie. Not in the way Barbara sees it." My confusion must have shown on my face because she continued quickly. Barbara and Richard tried for years to have kids. They went through treatments, consultations, everything. Nothing worked. And then when they'd finally given up, I got pregnant. The words hung in the air. I blinked. You? Rachel nodded. I was younger then, 31, and stupid, in love with a man who didn't deserve it. When I found out I was pregnant, he was already gone. I had no money, no plan, and Barbara had just told me she'd accepted that she'd never be a mother. I felt something cold settle in my chest. What are you saying? I asked. Rachel looked at me, her eyes glassy. I'm saying you're mine, Natalie. Biologically. But I gave you to Barbara because I thought she could give you a better life. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the table. You're my mother? She shook her head quickly. No. I mean, yes, I gave birth to you. But Barbara raised you. She's your mother in every legal sense. I just carried you. And then I handed you over because I thought it was the right thing to do. I couldn't breathe. My thoughts were racing, colliding, refusing to form a coherent shape. Why didn't you tell me? Because Barbara made me promise, Rachel said. She said if I ever told you, she'd cut me out completely. And I thought maybe it didn't matter. Maybe you'd be happy with them, and I could just be your aunt and that would be enough. But it wasn't enough, was it? I stood up, needing to move, needing space. I walked to the window and stared out at the trees. She resented me, I said. My whole life she resented me. Rachel's voice was thick. I know. And I'm so sorry, Natalie. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought she wanted you. But she didn't want me, I said. She wanted the idea of me. The idea of being a mother. And when it was hard, when I wasn't perfect, she couldn't handle it. Rachel didn't argue. We stood in silence for a long moment. Then I turned around. Why are you telling me this now? Because you deserve to know the truth, Rachel said. And because I can't watch you keep breaking yourself trying to earn love from people who don't know how to give it. There's more, she added quietly. I found your biological father. He doesn't know about you, but he's a good man. And he has family. A sister in Austin. Her name is Dr. Elizabeth Monroe. She's a psychiatrist, successful, kind. I reached out to her a few months ago and told her everything. I felt dizzy. This is too much. I know, Rachel said. But she wants to meet you. If you're ready. She gave me this. Rachel stood and walked to a drawer, pulling out an envelope. She handed it to me. Inside was a letter, written on thick cream-colored paper. The handwriting was elegant, looping. Dear Natalie, it began. I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I hope you do. My name is Elizabeth Monroe, and I'm your biological aunt. Your father was my younger brother, Daniel. He passed away 5 years ago in a car accident, and he never knew you existed. But I know now, and I can't tell you how much I wish I'd known sooner. If you ever want to know more about where you come from, about who Daniel was, I'm here. No pressure. No expectations. Just an open door. The letter included a phone number and an address in Austin. I stared at it until the words blurred. Rachel stood beside me. You don't have to do anything right now, she said. But I wanted you to have it. I folded the letter carefully and slipped it back into the envelope. I need to go, I said. Rachel nodded. Okay. But Natalie, before you do, I need you to hear this. You are not a burden. You are not a mistake. You were wanted, even if the people who raised you couldn't show it. And you deserve to be loved without conditions. I didn't respond. I couldn't. I just hugged her quickly and walked out to my car. The drive back to Portland was a blur. My mind replayed everything Rachel had said. Everything I'd learned. Barbara wasn't my biological mother. Rachel was. And somewhere in Austin there was a woman who knew my father, who wanted to know me. It was too much. Too fast. But underneath the shock, underneath the anger and confusion, there was something else. Something that felt almost like relief. When I got home, I sat on my couch with the envelope in my lap. I read the letter again. Then I read it a third time. Dr. Elizabeth Monroe. Austin, Texas. An open door. No pressure. No expectations. I thought about Thanksgiving. About the empty chairs and my mother's dismissive voice. About the years I'd spent trying to prove I was worth loving. And I realized something. I was done. I was done trying to fit into a family that had never made space for me. I was done apologizing for existing. I pulled out my laptop and opened a blank document. I started typing. It wasn't a letter. It wasn't an explanation. It was a plan. Plan to disappear. Not dramatically, not vengefully. Just quietly. Completely. I would leave Portland. I would leave Barbara and Richard and Derek and Amanda behind. And I would find out who I was supposed to be, in a place where no one had already decided I wasn't enough. I spent the next 2 weeks moving through my life like a ghost. I showed up to my shifts at the bookstore, smiled at customers, restocked the shelves with the same mechanical efficiency I'd always had. But my mind was somewhere else entirely, working through logistics, making lists, calculating what I'd need to do to vanish without leaving loose threads. I started small. I went through my apartment and sorted everything into 3 categories: keep, donate, trash. The keep pile was smaller than I expected. A few books I'd read so many times the spines were cracked. A blanket Rachel had made me years ago. My laptop and a handful of clothes. Everything else felt like weight I didn't need to carry anymore. The coffee maker I'd bought on sale, the decorative pillows Amanda had given me one Christmas that never matched my style, the framed photo of the 4 of us at Derek's college graduation where I stood slightly apart from everyone else. I stared at that photo for a long time before dropping it into the trash pile. I called my landlord on a Tuesday morning and gave him notice. I'm moving at the end of the month, I said. He asked where I was going. Out of state, I told him. New job opportunity. He didn't press further. He said he'd mail my deposit to my forwarding address. I gave him Rachel's address in Sisters. She was the only person I planned to stay in contact with, the only person who deserved to know where I'd gone. Everything else could disappear. I closed my bank account at the local branch and opened a new one online. Something untethered to Oregon. I sold my car, a 10-year-old sedan that barely ran, to a guy who paid in cash and didn't ask questions. I'd buy something else once I got to Texas. For now, I bought a one-way plane ticket to Austin and felt my chest tighten and release at the same time. The hardest part was work. I liked my job at the bookstore. I liked the quiet rhythm of it, the smell of paper and coffee, the regulars who came in every Saturday and always asked for recommendations. My manager, a woman named Iris with silver streaks in her dark hair, noticed I was distracted. "You okay, Natalie?" she asked one afternoon while we were processing a shipment. "I'm fine," I said, slicing open a box with more force than necessary. She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. 2 days before I planned to leave, I went to her office and handed in my resignation. I wrote it the night before, keeping it brief and professional. "Thank you for the opportunity. I've accepted a position out of state. My last day will be Friday." Iris read it, then looked up at me. "This is sudden." "I know," I said. "I'm sorry for the short notice." She set the letter down. "Are you running from something or toward something?" The question caught me off guard. "Both," I said honestly. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. "Okay. If you ever need a reference, you know where to find me." I thanked her and left before my voice could betray how much that kindness meant. On my last shift, a few coworkers signed a card and gave me a gift certificate to a bookstore chain. I accepted it with a smile and promised to stay in touch, knowing I wouldn't. When I walked out that evening, I didn't look back. The building disappeared behind me. Just another part of a life I was leaving behind. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and wrote 3 letters. The first was to Barbara and Richard. I kept it short, clinical, the kind of tone you'd use in a resignation letter. "I want to thank you for providing for me over the years. I know it wasn't easy, and I appreciate the roof you gave me and the stability you tried to offer. That said, I've realized that we want different things from this relationship, and I don't think it's healthy for me to keep trying to fit into a space that was never meant for me. I'm moving forward, and I need to do that on my own terms. I won't be reachable for a while. Please respect that." I signed it simply, Natalie. The second letter was to Derek and Amanda. I struggled with this one. Part of me wanted to rage at them, to list every time they'd chosen our parents over me, every dismissal, every moment I'd been erased. But anger required energy I didn't have anymore. So I kept it simple. "I hope you both find what you're looking for. I'm finding mine somewhere else. Take care of yourselves." The third letter was to Rachel. This one took the longest. I started and stopped a dozen times, trying to find words big enough to hold everything I felt. "Thank you for showing up," I finally wrote. "Thank you for telling me the truth, even when it was hard. Thank you for being the only person who ever made me feel like I mattered." I'm going to Austin to meet Elizabeth. I don't know what I'll find there, but I need to try. I'll call you when I'm settled. I love you. This time I signed it with more than my name. Your daughter, even if the paperwork says otherwise. I printed all 3 letters and sealed them in envelopes. I'd mailed them from the airport. I didn't want to give anyone time to respond, to argue, to try to pull me back. The morning I left, I woke up before dawn. My apartment was nearly empty, just the furniture that had come with the place and a few boxes I'd already dropped off at Goodwill. I did one final walk-through, checking closets and drawers, making sure I hadn't left anything behind. In the bathroom, I found an old bottle of perfume Barbara had given me for my birthday years ago. I'd never worn it. It smelled too floral, too sweet, like something she would wear. I dropped it in the trash and walked out. The Uber to the airport was quiet. The driver asked if I was visiting family for the holidays. Something like that, I said. He nodded and didn't ask anything else. At the airport, I mailed the 3 letters from a blue mailbox near the entrance. I watched them disappear into the slot and felt something final click into place. There was no taking it back now. No changing my mind. I was gone. Security took longer than expected, and by the time I reached my gate, boarding had already started. I found my seat near the back of the plane, a window seat that looked out over the tarmac. As the plane lifted off, I watched Portland shrink below me, the city grid spreading out in neat lines, the river cutting through the center like a scar. I thought about all the years I'd spent there trying to build a life, trying to belong, and then I thought about how small it all looked from up here. How easy it was to leave. The flight was 3.5 hours. I didn't sleep. I sat with my forehead pressed against the window, watching clouds drift past, thick and white and endless. Somewhere below was the country I'd never really seen. Somewhere ahead was a woman who knew my father, who wanted to know me. I didn't let myself imagine what that would look like. I'd been disappointed too many times by hope. When the plane landed in Austin, the sky was bright and warm. Nothing like the cold gray I'd left behind in Portland. I collected my single suitcase from baggage claim and stood in the arrivals area, suddenly uncertain. I hadn't told Elizabeth the first was coming. I had her address from the letter, but I didn't know if just showing up was the right move. What if she'd changed her mind? What if the letter had been polite fiction, something you write but don't actually mean? I pulled out my phone and stared at the number she'd included. My thumb hovered over the call button. Then I pressed it. The phone rang twice before a woman answered. Hello? Her voice was warm, professional, the kind of voice that put people at ease. Hi, I said, my voice shakier than I wanted. This is Natalie Brooks. There was a pause. Then a sharp intake of breath. Natalie. Oh my God. You got my letter. I did, I said. I'm actually in Austin. Right now. The airport. Another pause, longer this time. You're here? Yes, I said. I'm sorry, I should have called ahead. I didn't know if you really meant. Stop, she said, cutting me off gently. Don't apologize. I meant every word. Where are you? Do you need a ride? I have a rental car reserved, I said. But I don't know where to go. Come to my place, she said immediately. I'll text you the address. And Natalie? Yeah. I'm so glad you're here. She hung up, and a moment later, my phone buzzed with a text. An address in downtown Austin, near the lake. I plugged it into my GPS and headed to the rental counter. 20 minutes later, I was driving through Austin in a compact sedan that still smelled like air freshener. The city was bigger than I expected, busier, full of murals and food trucks and people on scooters weaving through traffic. It felt alive in a way Portland never had. Or maybe I just felt more awake. Elizabeth's building was a modern high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows and a doorman who asked for my name before letting me in. I gave it, and he nodded and pointed me toward the elevator. 12th floor, he said. She's expecting you. The elevator ride felt impossibly long. My reflection stared back at me from the mirrored walls. I looked pale, tired, like someone who'd been holding their breath for too long. When the doors opened, Elizabeth was already standing in the hallway. She was tall, taller than I expected, with dark hair pulled into a low ponytail and sharp, kind eyes. She wore jeans and a simple white blouse, barefoot despite the cold tile. She looked polished but approachable, like someone who'd figured out how to be both professional and human. Natalie, she said softly. I nodded, suddenly unable to speak. She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around me. It wasn't the hesitant, careful hug of a stranger. It was firm, grounding, the kind of hug that said, "I've been waiting for you." We stood like that for a moment, and I felt something inside me start to unravel. When she pulled back, her eyes were wet. "Come inside," she said. "Let's talk." Her loft was beautiful. Exposed brick walls, wide open spaces, bookshelves that stretched to the ceiling. A large window overlooked Lady Bird Lake, the water shimmering in the afternoon sun. It felt like a place where someone lived intentionally, where every object had been chosen with care. She gestured toward the couch, a deep gray sectional with soft pillows. "Sit, please. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "Water's fine," I said. She disappeared into the kitchen and returned a moment later with 2 glasses. She sat across from me, folding her legs beneath her. "I don't even know where to start," she said with a small laugh. "Me neither," I admitted. She smiled. "Okay, let's start simple. How are you?" The question was so genuine, so uncomplicatedly kind, that I almost started crying right there. "I'm okay," I said. "It's been a complicated few weeks." She nodded. "Rachel told me a little. About Thanksgiving. About your family." "I'm so sorry, Natalie." I shook my head. "You don't need to apologize. You didn't do anything wrong." "Neither did you," she said firmly. "And I need you to know that. Whatever you've been told, whatever you've been made to feel, none of it was your fault." I looked down at my hands. "It's hard to believe that sometimes." "I know," she said. "But it's true." She leaned forward slightly. "Can I tell you about Daniel? About your father?" I nodded. She took a breath. "He was my little brother. 4 years younger. He was brilliant, kind, completely irresponsible with money but generous to a fault. He loved music. He played guitar badly but with so much enthusiasm it didn't matter." She laughed softly, her eyes distant. "He was one of those people who made everyone around him feel lighter." "What happened to him?" I asked. "Car accident," she said. 5 years ago. A drunk driver ran a red light. He died instantly." She paused. "He never knew about you. Rachel told me that when Barbara's sister, got pregnant, Daniel had already left town. He didn't even know." I felt a strange ache in my chest. "So he never—" "No," Elizabeth said gently. "But if he had, Natalie, he would have loved you. I'm sure of it." The certainty in her voice made something crack open inside me. We talked for hours. She told me stories about Daniel, about their childhood in a small town outside San Antonio, about how he'd wanted to be a musician but ended up working construction to pay the bills. She showed me photos. Daniel at 20, grinning with a guitar slung over his shoulder. Daniel at a family barbecue, arm around Elizabeth, both of them laughing. I stared at his face and tried to see myself in it. The nose maybe. The shape of the jaw. "Do I look like him?" I asked. Elizabeth studied me. "A little. You have his smile. But mostly you look like yourself." It was such a simple thing to say, but it landed with unexpected weight. I'd spent so much of my life trying to see myself in Barbara, in Richard, searching for some proof that I belonged. And here was someone telling me I didn't need to look like anyone else. As the afternoon stretched into evening, Elizabeth ordered takeout, Thai food that we ate straight from the containers while sitting on the floor near the window. She asked about my life, about Portland, about what I wanted to do next. "I don't know," I admitted. "I just knew I needed to leave." She nodded. "That's a start. And you're welcome to stay here as long as you need. Figure things out. No pressure." I looked at her, searching for the catch. "There's always a catch." "Why?" I asked. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." She set down her container and met my eyes. "Because you're family. And because I know what it's like to feel like you don't have a place. When my parents died, I was 23. Daniel was 19. We only had each other. And that was enough." She paused. "You deserve people who choose you, Natalie. I'm choosing you." The word settled into me, warm and unfamiliar. I didn't know how to respond, so I just nodded. "Thank you," I said quietly. She smiled. "You're welcome." That night, she set me up in the guest room. A small space with a comfortable bed and a window that overlooked the city. I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of a new place. For the first time in weeks, maybe years, I didn't feel the tight knot of anxiety in my chest. I didn't feel like I was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I just felt still. And that stillness felt like the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. The first morning in Austin, I woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows. For a moment I didn't know where I was. The ceiling was wrong, the sounds outside were wrong. Even the air felt different, warmer and drier than Portland ever was. Then I remembered. Elizabeth, Texas. The choice I'd made to leave everything behind. I lay there for a while, letting it all settle over me like a blanket I wasn't sure I deserved yet. The apartment was quiet. I checked my phone and saw it was almost 9, later than I usually slept. There was a text from Rachel sent an hour ago. Did you make it to Austin okay? I know you're probably still figuring things out, but let me know you're safe when you can. Love you, kiddo. I typed back quickly. I'm here. I'm safe. I met Elizabeth yesterday. She's wonderful. Thank you for everything. I hit send before I could second-guess the words. There was nothing from Barbara. Nothing from Derek or Amanda. The letters wouldn't have arrived yet, but I knew that even when they did, the silence would probably continue. They'd gotten what they wanted. A version of our family that didn't include me taking up space, asking for things, reminding them of obligations they never wanted. I got out of bed and pulled on the same clothes I'd worn the day before. My suitcase sat in the corner, still mostly packed. I hadn't brought much, just enough to survive a week or two while I figured out what came next. When I opened the bedroom door, the smell of coffee hit me immediately, rich and dark. I followed it into the kitchen where Elizabeth stood by the counter, pouring from a French press into 2 mugs. She looked up and smiled. Morning. I wasn't sure if you were a coffee person, but I made extra. Just in case. I am, I said, accepting the mug she offered. Thank you. We stood there for a moment, sipping in comfortable silence. She was already dressed for the day, black slacks and a soft gray sweater, her hair pulled back neatly. I have a few client calls this morning, she said. But I should be done by noon. I thought maybe we could go somewhere after. There's a place I'd like to show you. What kind of place? I asked. She smiled. You'll see. I spent the morning alone in the loft, which felt both strange and freeing. I sat by the window with my second cup of coffee and watched the city move below. People jogging along the lake trail. Dogs pulling their owners toward the water. A group of tourists taking photos near a bridge. Everyone looked like they had somewhere to be, something to do. I wondered what it would feel like to be one of them, to belong to a place instead of just passing through it. Around 11, I opened my laptop and started searching for jobs in Austin. Bookstores, libraries, coffee shops, anything that felt familiar. I bookmarked a few postings but didn't apply. Not yet. I wasn't ready to commit to staying, even though some part of me already knew I wasn't going back. At noon, Elizabeth emerged from her office, a small room off the main living area. She looked tired but satisfied. Ready? She asked. I nodded and grabbed my jacket. We drove in her car, a sleek black sedan that smelled faintly of leather and vanilla. She didn't tell me where we were going, just navigated through the city with the ease of someone who'd lived here for years. We eventually pulled into a neighborhood on the east side, streets lined with older homes painted in bright colors, murals on the sides of buildings, a taco truck on nearly every corner. She parked in front of a community center, a low building with wide windows and a hand-painted sign that read East Side Youth Alliance. This is where I volunteer, Elizabeth said as we got out. Twice a week, I run therapy sessions for kids who've been through the foster system or family trauma. I thought you might want to see it. I followed her inside. The space was warm and welcoming, walls covered in artwork, beanbag chairs scattered around a reading nook, a small kitchen in the back. A woman with short curly hair and bright purple glasses looked up from a desk and grinned. Liz, you're early. Elizabeth laughed. I know. Miracle, right? This is Natalie. She's visiting from out of town. The woman, whose name tag read Vanessa, reached out to shake my hand. Nice to meet you. You sticking around for group? Elizabeth glanced at me. Only if you want to. No pressure. I hesitated, then nodded. Sure. We sat in on a session with 6 teenagers, all between 14 and 17. They were guarded at first, arms crossed, eyes averted. But Elizabeth had a way of drawing them out, asking questions that didn't feel invasive, listening without judgment. One girl talked about how her foster parents made her feel like a guest in their house, Always temporary. Always conditional. A boy with a faded bruise on his cheek said he didn't think anyone would notice if he disappeared. Elizabeth didn't offer platitudes. She just listened. And then she said, I notice you. We all do. You matter even when it doesn't feel like it. I sat in the back and watched my chest tight. I saw myself in every single one of them. The guardedness. The hunger for someone to see them. The belief that maybe, just maybe, they were the problem. After the session, Vanessa pulled Elizabeth aside to talk logistics, and I stepped outside for air. One of the kids from the group, the girl who talked about feeling like a guest, was sitting on the steps. She looked up when I sat down beside her. You're not a therapist, she said. It wasn't a question. No, I said. I'm not. She picked at a thread on her jeans. Then why were you in there? I thought for a moment. Because I used to feel the way you do. She glanced at me skeptical. Yeah, I said. I spent my whole life trying to prove I was worth keeping. And it never worked. So what did you do? She asked. I left, I said simply. Moved somewhere new. Started over. She was quiet for a moment. Did it help? I don't know yet, I admitted. But it feels better than staying. She nodded slowly, like she was filing that information away for later. Elizabeth emerged a few minutes later, and we said goodbye to Vanessa and the kids. On the drive back, Elizabeth was quiet. Finally, she said, thank you for coming today. I know that probably wasn't easy. It wasn't, I said. But I'm glad I did. She glanced over at me. You're good with them. The kids. You didn't say much, but they could tell you understood. I shrugged. I just know what it's like. That's exactly why you're good with them, she said. Over the next 2 weeks, I fell into a rhythm. Mornings, I'd sit by the window with coffee and apply to jobs. Afternoons, I'd explore the city, walking along the lake or wandering through bookstores and markets. Evenings, Elizabeth and I would cook together, trading stories over chopped vegetables and simmering pots. She told me about her work, about the clients she saw, the kids at the center. I told her about Portland, about the bookstore, about Rachel. I didn't talk much about Barbara or Richard or the years I'd spent trying to fit into a family that didn't want me. But Elizabeth didn't push. She just listened when I was ready. One evening, about 3 weeks after I'd arrived, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was Oregon. I let it go to voicemail. A few minutes later, I listened to the message. It was Amanda. Her voice was tight-clipped. Natalie, it's me. Mom got your letter. She's upset. We all are. I don't understand why you're doing this. We're your family. Just call me back, okay? I deleted the message without responding. The next day Derek called. I didn't answer. Then Barbara called. Then Richard. I blocked all their numbers. I wasn't angry anymore. I was just done. A week later, I got a job offer from a small independent bookstore in South Austin. They needed someone to manage inventory and help with events. The pay wasn't great, but it was enough. I accepted. That night, Elizabeth opened a bottle of wine to celebrate. To new beginnings, she said, raising her glass. I clinked mine against hers. To new beginnings. As December rolled in, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years. Not happiness exactly, but something close. Contentment, maybe. Or just the absence of dread. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore. I wasn't bracing for rejection. I was just living. Elizabeth asked if I wanted to spend Christmas with her. I have a few friends coming over, she said. Nothing big. Just dinner and wine and too many desserts. I'd love for you to be there. I said yes. On Christmas Eve, I helped her decorate the loft. We strung lights along the windows and set up a small tree in the corner. She pulled out a box of ornaments, some old and chipped, some clearly handmade. This one was Daniel's, she said, holding up a misshapen clay star. He made it in 3rd grade. I've kept it ever since. She hung it near the top of the tree. I watched her. This woman who'd lost her brother, who'd taken in a stranger because of a blood connection she hadn't even known existed a few months ago. Why are you really doing this? I asked. She looked at me puzzled. Doing what? This, I said, gesturing around. Letting me stay. Helping me. You didn't have to. She set down the ornament she was holding and came to sit beside me. Natalie, she said. You're not a burden. You're not a project. You're family. And family shows up. But you barely know me, I said. She shook her head. I know enough. I know you're kind. I know you're strong, even if you don't see it yet. I know you deserve people who choose you. And I'm choosing you. Not because I have to. Because I want to. Her words broke something open in me. Something I'd been holding tightly for too long. I started crying quietly at first, then harder. She pulled me into a hug and let me cry into her shoulder. I'm sorry, I said through the tears. Don't be, she whispered. You're allowed to feel this. On Christmas Day, her friends arrived. A couple named Marcus and Joel who brought homemade tamales. A woman named Priya who worked at the hospital with Elizabeth and told stories that had everyone laughing until they cried. And Vanessa from the youth center, who brought her wife and a pecan pie that smelled like heaven. We ate until we were full, then kept eating. We played cards and argued over the rules and drank too much wine. And for the first time in my life, I felt like I was part of something real. Something unchoreographed. Something that didn't require me to perform or prove myself. Late that night, after everyone had gone home, Elizabeth and I sat by the tree. The lights cast soft shadows across the room. She handed me a small box wrapped in silver paper. I didn't know what to get you, she said. But I saw this and thought of you. I opened it carefully. Inside was a necklace. A simple silver chain with a small compass pendant. So you always know which way you're going, she said. Even when it's hard. I put it on, the metal cool against my skin. Thank you, I said. She smiled. Merry Christmas, Natalie. The next week, another letter arrived. It was forwarded from Rachel's address, and I recognized the handwriting immediately. Barbara. I almost threw it away without opening it. But something made me sit down and read it. The letter was short. Natalie, I don't understand why you left or why you felt the need to cut us out. We gave you everything we could. If that wasn't enough, I'm sorry. But running away doesn't solve anything. You're still part of this family whether you like it or not. I hope you come to your senses soon. I read it twice, waiting to feel something. Anger, maybe. Sadness. But all I felt was distance. She still didn't get it. She probably never would. I wrote back one final time. Barbara, I didn't run away. I walked towards something better. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just done trying to earn love from people who were never going to give it freely. I hope you find peace in whatever version of family works for you. But I'm building my own now with people who actually want me in it. Take care of yourself. I mailed it the next day and felt nothing but relief. In February, I got a call from Rachel. She sounded excited. I have news, she said. I'm moving to Austin. What? Why? Because you're there, she said simply. And because I've always wanted to live somewhere warmer. I already found a place. A little house near Zilker Park. I'll be there by March. I felt tears prick my eyes. Rachel. Don't cry, she said, laughing. I'm not doing this out of obligation. I'm doing it because I love you. And because I want to be near you. You're my daughter, Natalie. In every way that matters. She moved in 6 weeks later. We spent a weekend helping her unpack, Elizabeth and I carrying boxes and assembling furniture. By the end of it, her house looked like her, colorful and artistic and full of warmth. That night, we sat on her back porch with cold beers, watching the sun set over the trees. This feels right, Rachel said. Being here. With you. I leaned my head on her shoulder. Yeah, I said. It does. One afternoon in late March, Elizabeth asked if I wanted to help her with something at the youth center. There's a girl I've been working with, she said. She reminds me of you. Guarded, smart, convinced she's unlovable. I thought maybe you could talk to her. I went. The girl's name was Sophia. She was 16 with dark eyes and a sharp tongue she used like armor. Elizabeth introduced us and then left us alone in the art room. Sophia didn't look at me, just kept drawing something in a sketchbook. You don't have to talk to me, I said. But if you want to, I'm here. She glanced up. Elizabeth said you used to be in foster care. Sort of, I said. It's complicated. She went back to her drawing. Everything's complicated. I sat down across from her. Can I tell you something? She shrugged. I spent most of my life thinking I was the problem, I said. That if I just tried harder was better, quieter, more useful, people would love me. But it didn't work. Because the problem was never me. It was them. Sophia stopped drawing. What did you do? I left, I said. I found people who actually wanted me around. And I stopped. Waiting for people who didn't. She stared at me for a long moment. Was it hard? Yeah, I said. but staying would have been harder. She nodded slowly. Then she went back to her drawing. But something in her posture had softened. I kept going back to the center after that. Once a week, then twice. I wasn't a therapist, but I didn't need to be. I just needed to show up. To listen. To remind kids like Sophia that they weren't broken. Even when the world told them they were. By the time summer arrived, Austin felt like home. I had a job I liked. I had Elizabeth and Rachel. I had a small circle of friends from the bookstore in the center. I had a life I'd built from scratch. One that didn't require me to shrink or apologize or disappear. One evening Elizabeth and I were cooking dinner when she said, "I'm proud of you." I looked up from the cutting board. For what? For choosing yourself, she said. For walking away from people who didn't deserve you. For building something new. That takes courage. I didn't feel courageous. I just felt tired of being small. But maybe that was the same thing. In August, I got a text from an unknown number. It took me a moment to realize it was Amanda. She must have gotten my new number from Rachel. The message was short. "I'm sorry for how we treated you. I should have stood up for you. I know it's too late, but I needed you to know that." I stared at the message for a long time. Part of me wanted to respond to say thank you or it's okay or something that would close the loop. But the truth was I didn't need her apology. I didn't need closure from any of them. I was already closed. I deleted the message and went back to my book. That Thanksgiving Rachel hosted. She invited Elizabeth, Vanessa and her wife, Marcus and Joel, and a few of my coworkers from the bookstore. We crowded around her small dining table, passing dishes and laughing over stories. There were no place cards. No seating chart. Just people who wanted to be there, choosing to show up for each other. At one point Rachel raised her glass. "To family," she said. "The kind you choose." We all raised our glasses. To family. Later, when the dishes were cleared and people were lingering over coffee and pie, I stepped outside onto Rachel's porch. The air was cool, the sky clear and full of stars. Elizabeth joined me a moment later. "You okay?" she asked. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm good." She smiled. "Good." We stood there in comfortable silence and I realized something. I wasn't the girl who'd sat alone at a table set for 8 anymore. I wasn't the girl who begged for scraps of love from people who had none to give. I was someone new. Someone who'd walked away from the wreckage and built something beautiful in its place. And I was finally undeniably home. Months passed. Then a year. I kept working at the bookstore. I kept volunteering at the center. I kept showing up for the people who showed up for me. And slowly, quietly, I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped waiting for the past to catch up with me. I just lived. One day, I got a notification that Barbara had tried to friend me on social media. I declined it without hesitation. Another day, Derek sent an email asking if we could talk. I didn't respond. They were ghosts now. Faint echoes of a life I'd outgrown. And that was okay. Because I had Rachel, who called me every Sunday just to check in. I had Elizabeth, who'd become more than an aunt, more than a mentor. She'd become the mother I'd always needed. I had Sophia, who graduated high school and got into college and sent me a photo of her acceptance letter with the caption, "You were right." I wasn't the problem. I had a life that fit. A life that didn't require me to apologize for existing. A life where I was seen, chosen, loved. Not because I'd earned it. Just because I was me. And that finally was enough. On the second anniversary of the Thanksgiving that changed everything, I stood on the balcony of my own apartment. A small one-bedroom I'd rented near the lake. The city stretched out before me, glowing in the evening light. My phone buzzed. A text from Rachel. "Dinner tomorrow? Elizabeth's bringing dessert. I'm making my famous lasagna." I smiled and typed back. "I'll be there." I set my phone down and looked out at the water, at the people walking below, at the life I'd built from nothing but hope and the courage to walk away. And I realized something. I hadn't just survived. I'd become the person I was always meant to be. The person who didn't need anyone's permission to exist. The person who chose herself. And she was finally free. It was early spring when the invitation arrived. Not a physical one this time, but an email that appeared in my inbox on a Tuesday afternoon, while I was shelving poetry collections in the quiet corner of the bookstore. The subject line read "Family Reunion, Brooks Family," and for a moment, I just stared at it. my finger hovering over the delete button. I hadn't heard from anyone with the last name Brooks in over a year. The silence had been intentional on my part, necessary even, and I'd assumed they'd accepted it. But apparently someone had decided it was time to try again. I opened the email during my break, sitting in the back room with a cup of lukewarm coffee. It was from Derek. The tone was casual, almost breezy, like we just talked last week instead of not at all since I'd left. Hey Natalie, hope you're doing well. Mom's putting together a family reunion this summer, July 15th at the house in Bend. The whole family will be there, cousins, aunts, uncles, everyone. It would mean a lot if you came. We miss you. Let me know. There was something so audaciously normal about it, as if the past 2 years hadn't happened. As if I hadn't sent a letter explaining exactly why I was done. As if my absence had been a misunderstanding rather than a choice. I read it 3 times, waiting for anger to surface. It didn't. I just felt distant, like I was reading about someone else's life. I showed it to Elizabeth that evening. We were sitting in her living room, she with a glass of red wine and a stack of patient files she was reviewing, me with a book I'd been trying to finish for weeks. She read the email over my shoulder and made a small sound of disbelief. Are they serious? Apparently, I said. She handed my phone back. What do you want to do? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to ignore it. But another part wonders if I owe them some kind of closure. You don't owe them anything, Elizabeth said firmly. You already gave them closure. You told them you were done. If they didn't accept that, that's their problem, not yours. I knew she was right. But something about the email had unsettled me. Maybe it was the word family used so casually, as if it meant the same thing to all of us. Or maybe it was the realization that even after everything, some part of me still wanted them to understand. Not to forgive me because I hadn't done anything wrong, but to finally see me clearly. I talked to Rachel about it the next day over lunch at a taco place near her house. She listened while I explained the email, the confusion I felt, the strange pull toward something I thought I'd let go of. Rachel stirred her iced tea thoughtfully. Do you think going would give you something you need? She asked. Or do you think you'd be going because you still believe you have something to prove? I didn't have an answer. That's what I thought, she said gently. Look, kiddo, you've built a beautiful life here. You've got people who love you. You don't need their validation. But if you think facing them one more time would help you close that chapter for good, then do it. Just make sure you're doing it for you, not for them. I thought about it for days. I imagined showing up at the reunion, walking into that house on Maple Ridge Drive where I'd never quite belonged. I imagined seeing Barbara and Richard, Derek and Amanda, all the extended family who'd watched me grow up on the periphery. What would I even say? What would they say? And more importantly, did it matter? A week later, I replied to Derek's email. I kept it short. Thanks for the invite. I'll think about it. He responded within an hour. That's great. Really hope you can make it. It'll be good to see you. The ease of his response bothered me more than I expected. As if my presence or absence were interchangeable. As if I were just another name on a list. I didn't respond again. By mid-June, I'd made my decision. I was going to go. Not because I wanted to reconnect, but because I wanted to see them with clear eyes. I wanted to stand in front of them as the person I'd become, not the person they tried to make me. And I wanted to prove to myself that I could walk into that space and walk back out unchanged, untouched, free. I told Elizabeth and Rachel my plan. Elizabeth looked concerned. Are you sure? I'm sure, I said. Rachel nodded slowly. Then I'm coming with you. I started to protest, but she held up a hand. You're not doing this alone, Natalie. I'll stay in the background, but I'm coming. Just in case. I felt a wave of gratitude so strong it almost knocked me over. Okay, I said. Thank you. We flew to Oregon on July 14th, renting a car at the airport and driving straight to Sisters where Rachel still owned her cottage. She'd kept it as a retreat, a place to escape to when Austin got too hot or too crowded. We spent the evening there, sitting on the porch with wine and cheese, not talking about the next day. Just being. That night I barely slept. I lay in the guest bed staring at the ceiling, running through scenarios in my mind. What I'd say. How I'd hold myself. What I'd do if they tried to guilt me or blame me or pretend nothing had ever been wrong. By the time the sun came up, I felt exhausted but resolved. The reunion started at noon. Rachel and I left Sisters at 11, the drive to Bend short and quiet. My hands were steady on the wheel, but my chest felt tight. As we pulled onto Maple Ridge Drive, I saw cars lining the street. Derek's truck. Amanda's sedan. Vehicles I didn't recognize, probably belonging to aunts and uncles and cousins I barely knew. The house looked the same. Neat lawn, trimmed hedges, the porch swaying slightly in the breeze. It looked like a postcard of suburban normalcy, the kind of place where families were supposed to thrive. I parked across the street and turned off the engine. "You ready?" Rachel asked. "As I'll ever be," I said. We walked up the driveway together. I could hear voices in the backyard, laughter and the clatter of dishes. My stomach twisted, but I kept moving. I knocked on the front door. Felt absurd to knock, but I wasn't going to just walk in like I still lived here. The door opened a moment later, and Amanda stood there. She looked older, her hair shorter, a baby on her hip. Her eyes widened when she saw me. "Natalie." "Oh my God." "Hi," I said. Amanda glanced at Rachel, then back at me. "I didn't think you'd actually come." "Well, I'm here," I said. She stepped aside. "Come in. Everyone's out back." The house smelled the same. Vanilla candles and furniture polish. The walls were still the same pale beige. The photos on the mantel still arranged in perfect symmetry. I saw my senior portrait tucked in the back corner, smaller than everyone else's, slightly off-center. Rachel stayed close as we walked through the living room and into the kitchen. Through the sliding glass door, I could see the backyard full of people. Tables set up with food, kids running through the grass, adults clustered in groups talking and laughing. Barbara stood near the grill, wearing a floral apron and holding a pair of tongs. She looked the same, maybe a little grayer, a little more tired. Richard was next to her, flipping burgers with the kind of focus that suggested he didn't want to be there either. Amanda stepped outside first. "Mom, Dad, Natalie's here." The backyard went quiet. Not completely, but enough that I felt the shift. Heads turned. Conversations paused. Barbara looked up, and for a moment something flickered across her face. Surprise, maybe. Or discomfort. She set down the tongs and walked toward me, wiping her hands on her apron. "Natalie," she said. Her voice was neutral, careful. "You came." "I did," I said. "This is Rachel." Barbara's eyes flicked to her sister, and her expression tightened. "Rachel?" "Of course." Rachel gave a small nod but didn't say anything. The silence stretched, awkward and heavy. Then Richard stepped forward. "Good to see you, Natalie. You look well." "Thanks," I said. "You too." Derek appeared from somewhere near the food table, a beer in hand. "Hey Nat, glad you made it." I nodded. People gradually went back to their conversations, though I could feel eyes on me, curious and judgmental in equal measure. Barbara gestured toward the food. "Help yourself. There's plenty." "I'm good for now," I said. She nodded, then turned back to the grill without another word. Rachel and I stood there for a moment, outsiders in a space that should have felt familiar but didn't. An older woman I vaguely recognized as my father's sister approached with a polite smile. "Natalie dear, it's been so long. How have you been?" "Good," I said. "I've been really good." "And you?" "Oh, she said vaguely. "Keeping busy." She drifted away after a few more pleasantries, and I realized that no one actually wanted to engage. I was a box they checked off. Invited Natalie. She came. Done. Rachel leaned closer. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. Just realizing this was a mistake. "We don't have to stay long," she said. "I know." We stayed for an hour. I made small talk with cousins I hadn't seen in years. I watched Amanda's baby crawl across a blanket. I accepted a plate of food I didn't eat and sat at a table on the edge of the yard, observing more than participating. At one point, Barbara walked past and paused. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Sure," I said. She led me inside to the living room, away from the noise. Rachel stayed outside but kept me in her line of sight through the window. Barbara sat on the edge of the couch, hands folded in her lap. "I was surprised when Derek said you were coming," she said. "I almost didn't," I admitted. She looked at me, really looked at me for the first time and maybe ever. "You've changed." "I have," I said. She seemed to be searching for something to say, something that would bridge the gap. "I'm sorry if we made you feel unwelcome," she said finally. "That wasn't our intention." I took a breath. "Barbara, you told me it would have been easier if I'd never been born." She flinched. I was upset. "I didn't mean it." "Maybe," I said. "But you said it." And that's not something I can unhear. She looked down. I gave you a home, Natalie. I gave you everything I could. You gave me a roof, I said. But you never made me feel like I was yours. There's a difference. She didn't respond. I didn't come here for an apology, I continued. I came here to see if maybe I was wrong about all of it. But I wasn't. You never wanted me. You wanted the idea of being a mother. And when I didn't fit that idea, you resented me for it. Barbara's jaw tightened. That's not fair. Maybe not, I said. But it's true. We sat in silence for a moment. Then she said, so what now? You just cut us out forever? I already did, I said gently. This was just me proving to myself that I made the right choice. And I did. I stood up. I hope you find peace, Barbara. I really do. But I can't keep sacrificing mine for yours. I walked out before she could respond. Rachel was waiting by the door. We left without saying goodbye to anyone else. As we drove away, I felt lighter. Not because I'd gotten closure exactly, but because I'd confirmed what I already knew. I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval or their love or their version of family. I had my own. That evening, Rachel and I sat on her porch again, the sky fading from pink to purple. You did good today, she said. I survived, I said. That's more than good, she said. That's everything. We flew back to Austin the next morning. Elizabeth picked us up from the airport, and the three of us went to dinner at a small Italian place near the lake. I told them about the reunion, about Barbara, about the quiet confirmation that I'd made the right choice. Elizabeth reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you. For what? I asked. For not letting them pull you back, she said. For knowing your worth. The weeks after the reunion passed quickly. I threw myself into work, into volunteering, into the life I'd built. I started teaching a creative writing workshop at the youth center, helping kids tell their stories. Sophia was one of my first students, and watching her find her voice was one of the most rewarding things I'd ever done. In August, I got an email from Amanda. It was longer than her previous attempts, more thoughtful. She apologized for the years she'd stayed silent, for not standing up for me, for letting our parents dictate how she treated me. She said she understood if I didn't want a relationship, but that she hoped someday I might. I read it twice, then saved it in a folder and didn't respond. Maybe someday I would. But not yet. That fall, I enrolled in a graduate program. Elizabeth had encouraged me to think about becoming a therapist, specializing in foster care and family trauma. Felt right. Like all the pain I'd carried could be turned into something useful, something healing. The program was intense, but I loved it. I loved learning the language for what I'd experienced, the frameworks that explained why some families fracture and others hold. I loved knowing that I could help kids like Sophia, like the version of myself I used to be. One evening in late September, I was studying at a coffee shop near campus when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was Oregon. I almost didn't answer. Then I did. Hello? There was a pause. Then a man's voice, uncertain. Natalie? Yeah, I said. Who is this? It's your dad. Richard. I froze. Richard hadn't called me in over 2 years. We'd barely spoken even when I lived in Portland. Why are you calling? I asked. He cleared his throat. I wanted to apologize. For the reunion. For how your mother handled things. For how I handled things. I didn't say anything. I know I wasn't a good father to you, he continued. I let Barbara take the lead, and I should have stepped in. I should have made you feel wanted. But I didn't. And I'm sorry. The apology hung in the air. It's too late, I said quietly. I know, he said. I just needed you to hear it. Okay, I said. I've heard it. There was a long silence. Are you happy? He asked. Yes, I said. I am. Good, he said. That's good. We hung up. I sat there for a while staring at my phone. I didn't feel anger or sadness. Just a strange kind of peace. He'd apologized. It didn't change anything, but maybe it didn't need to. By the time winter arrived, I'd settled fully into my new life. I had my apartment, my job, my studies, my people. I had Rachel and Elizabeth and Sophia and the kids at the center. I had a community I'd chosen and who'd chosen me back. One night in December, the three of us, Rachel, Elizabeth, and I, sat around Elizabeth's dining table decorating cookies for a holiday party at the center. Flour dusted the counter, icing smeared across our hands, Christmas music playing softly in the background. "This is nice," Rachel said, biting into a slightly lopsided snowman. Elizabeth laughed. "Nice? This is chaos." "Good chaos," I said. "The best kind." Rachel looked at me, her eyes soft. "You know I love you, right?" "I know," I said. Elizabeth reached over and squeezed my hand. "We both do." I looked at them, these two women who'd become my family, and felt something settle deep in my chest. "I love you too," I said. And I meant it. That Christmas we hosted again. More friends, more food, more laughter. I looked around the room at one point and realized I'd stopped searching for what was missing. Because nothing was missing. I had everything I needed. In the new year I started my practicum, working directly with kids in the foster system. It was hard, harder than I'd expected, but also deeply fulfilling. Every session felt like I was talking to a younger version of myself, offering the words I'd needed to hear. "You're not broken. You're not too much. You're exactly enough." One afternoon, a girl named Marissa, 13 and angry at the world, asked me why I cared. "Because someone cared about me when I needed it most," I said. "And it saved my life." She stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded just slightly and went back to her drawing. It was a start. By spring, Sophia graduated from my writing workshop. She'd written a collection of poems about identity and belonging, raw and beautiful. And honest. She asked me to come to her reading at a local bookstore. I sat in the front row with Elizabeth and Rachel, and when Sophia read her final poem, a piece about finding family in unexpected places, I cried. After the reading, she found me in the crowd. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For showing me it gets better," she said. "For proving I'm not stuck." "You did that yourself," I said. "I just reminded you." She hugged me, quick and fierce, then disappeared into the crowd of people congratulating her. Elizabeth put her arm around my shoulders. "You're changing lives, Natalie." "I'm just showing up," I said. "That's exactly what I mean," she said. As the months passed, I kept showing up. For my classes, for my practicum, for the kids at the center, for Rachel and Elizabeth and the life we'd built together. I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped waiting for the past to catch me. I just kept moving forward. One evening in late spring, I was walking along the lake when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. I opened it hesitantly. It was from Amanda. "I just wanted to say I'm proud of you. I heard you're in grad school. That's amazing. I don't expect you to respond. I just wanted you to know." I stared at the message for a long time. Then I typed back. "Thank you. That means more than you know." It wasn't forgiveness. It wasn't reconciliation. But it was acknowledgement. And maybe that was enough. That summer, I finished my first year of graduate school. Elizabeth threw a small party to celebrate, just close friends and a cake that said "Congratulations, Dr. Brooks in training." I laughed when I saw it. "I'm nowhere near a doctor yet." "Doesn't matter," Elizabeth said. "You will be. And we're celebrating now." That night, sitting on her balcony with Rachel and Elizabeth and a few friends, I realized something. I'd spent so much of my life looking for a place to belong, trying to force myself into spaces that were never meant for me. But I didn't need to do that anymore. Because I'd found it. Not a place but a feeling. The feeling of being seen. Of being chosen. Of being loved without conditions. And that feeling, I realized, was home. As the sun set over the lake, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes. For the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. I wasn't bracing for rejection or disappointment. I was just here. Present. Whole. Free. And that was everything. The notification came on a rainy Tuesday in October, 2 years after I'd last set foot in Bend. I was between classes, sitting in the campus library with my laptop open and a half-empty coffee going cold beside me. The email was from a law firm I didn't recognize. Subject line: Estate of Richard Allen Brooks. My finger hovered over the delete button for a full 10 seconds before curiosity won out. I opened it. The message was formal, detached in the way legal correspondence always is. "We regret to inform you of the passing of Richard Allen Brooks on October 3rd. As a named party in his will, your presence is requested at the reading on October 28th at our offices in Bend, Oregon. Please confirm your attendance at your earliest convenience." I read it 3 times before the words actually registered. Richard was dead. My foster father, the man who'd apologized to me over the phone a year ago, the man who'd stood silently by while Barbara made me feel invisible, was gone. I sat there in the library surrounded by students typing and whispering and living their lives, and felt absolutely nothing. No grief. No shock. Just a hollow kind of acknowledgement that someone I used to know no longer existed. I forwarded the email to Elizabeth and Rachel without commentary. Within 5 minutes, both of them called. I let the calls go to voicemail, packed up my things, and walked out into the rain. I needed to move, to feel something other than this strange numbness that had settled over me like a fog. By the time I got back to my apartment, both Rachel and Elizabeth were waiting in the parking lot. They must have coordinated because they arrived in separate cars at almost the same moment. I unlocked my door and let them in without saying anything. Elizabeth made tea. Rachel sat beside me on the couch and took my hand. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I don't feel anything." "That's okay," Elizabeth said from the kitchen. "There's no right way to feel about this." I stared at the wall. "He called me last year. Did I tell you that?" "You mentioned it," Rachel said. "What did he say?" "That he was sorry," I said. "That he should have been better. I told him it was too late. And now he's dead." The finality of it hit me then, not with sadness but with a strange kind of relief. He couldn't hurt me anymore. None of them could. "Are you going to go?" Elizabeth asked, setting a mug of tea in front of me. "To the will reading?" "I don't know," I said. "Why would he name me in his will?" "Maybe he wanted to make amends," Rachel suggested. "Or maybe it's just a formality. Either way, you don't have to go if you don't want to." I thought about it for the rest of the evening after they left. Part of me wanted to ignore the whole thing, to let the lawyers handle whatever needed handling and move on with my life. But another part of me, the part that had driven to that family reunion a year ago, wanted closure. Wanted to see this through to the end. I emailed the law firm the next morning. "I'll be there." They responded within the hour with the time and address. The flight to Oregon felt surreal. I'd made this trip before, but always with a knot of anxiety in my stomach, always bracing for disappointment or confrontation. This time I felt detached, like I was watching myself from a distance. Rachel offered to come with me, but I told her I needed to do this alone. She understood, or at least she pretended to. The weather in Bend was cold and gray, the kind of October day that promised snow before the week was out. I rented a car at the airport and drove to a hotel near downtown, checking in just as the sun was setting. I didn't tell anyone I was coming. I didn't reach out to Barbara or Derek or Amanda. This wasn't about them. The law offices were in an old brick building downtown, the kind with tall windows and creaking hardwood floors. I arrived 15 minutes early, signed in with the receptionist, and sat in the waiting area flipping through a magazine I wasn't reading. At exactly 10 o'clock, a young man in a navy suit appeared and introduced himself as Thomas Webb, the attorney handling Richard's estate. He led me down a hallway to a conference room where Barbara, Derek, and Amanda were already seated. The air went tense the moment I walked in. Barbara looked older, grayer, her face drawn and tired. Derek sat with his arms crossed, expression unreadable. Amanda glanced at me briefly, then looked away. I took a seat at the far end of the table, as far from them as possible. Mr. Webb sat at the head of the table and opened a folder. "Thank you all for coming," he said. "I know this is a difficult time. Let's begin." He read through the formalities, the legal language that meant nothing to me. Richard's assets were modest. The house on Maple Ridge Drive, a small savings account, a life insurance policy. Most of it was left to Barbara, as expected. Then Mr. Webb turned to a separate page. "To my daughter, Natalie Brooks," he read, "I leave the contents of the safety deposit box at First National Bank, as well as a letter I've written in the hopes that she'll understand what I could never say in life." The room went silent. Barbara's head snapped toward me, her expression somewhere between shock and anger. "A safety deposit box?" Derek said. "Since when did Dad have a safety deposit box?" Mr. Webb didn't look up. "The box was opened in Mr. Brooks' name in 1998. Ms. Brooks, you'll need to present identification and this key to access it." He slid a small brass key across the table toward me. I stared at it, my mind racing. 1998. That was the year I was placed with them. What could Richard have possibly put in a safety deposit box 27 years ago? "This is ridiculous," Barbara said, her voice sharp. She barely spoke to him for years. Why would he leave her anything? That's not for us to question, Mr. Webb said calmly. These were Mr. Brooks' wishes. Barbara stood abruptly. I need some air. She walked out, and after a moment Derek followed. Amanda stayed, her hands folded on the table. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. Are you going to open it? She asked. I don't know, I said. You should, she said quietly. Maybe it'll explain some things. The meeting ended shortly after. Mr. Webb gave me the address of the bank and told me I could access the box anytime during business hours. I thanked him and left before anyone else could corner me. I sat in my rental car for a long time, staring at the key in my hand. It was small and ordinary, the kind of thing you'd lose in a junk drawer. But it felt heavy, weighted with something I couldn't name. I drove to the bank without letting myself overthink it. The teller verified my identification, checked the key, and led me to a small private room with a table and a single chair. She brought in the safety deposit box, set it on the table, and left me alone. The box was metal, scratched and worn. I opened it slowly. Inside was a thick manila envelope, a small wooden box, and a stack of photographs held together with a rubber band. I reached for the envelope first. My name was written on the front in Richard's handwriting, neat and precise. I opened it and pulled out several pages of lined paper, the kind you'd tear from a notebook. The letter was dated 3 weeks before he died. Natalie, it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone. I don't know if that brings you relief or sadness or nothing at all. I wouldn't blame you for any of it. I've spent the last few years thinking about the kind of father I was to you, and the truth is I wasn't much of one. I let Barbara make all the decisions. I told myself it was easier that way, that she knew what she was doing. But the truth is I was a coward. I saw how she treated you and I did nothing. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for all of it. I paused, my hands trembling. The next page explained the contents of the box. When you were placed with us, your biological mother, Rachel, gave me a few things. Photographs of you as a baby. A letter she'd written to you in case you ever wanted to know where you came from. I kept them locked away because Barbara didn't want you to know. She wanted you to believe we were your only family, that you owed us everything. I should have fought her on that. I should have given you the truth. But I didn't. I'm giving it to you now, even if it's too late. The rest of the letter was an apology, variations on the same theme. He was sorry. He'd failed me. He hoped I could forgive him, though he didn't expect it. I set the letter down and reached for the photographs. There were a dozen of them, maybe more. Pictures of me as a baby, tiny and red-faced and wrapped in a hospital blanket. Pictures of Rachel holding me, young and scared and impossibly brave. Pictures of a man I didn't recognize, dark-haired and smiling, holding me in his arms. I turned one of the photos over. Written on the back in faded ink was Daniel, age 22. My father. The man I'd never met, never known, never had the chance to love. I stared at his face, searching for pieces of myself. The nose maybe. The shape of the eyes. It was like looking at a stranger in a mirror at the same time. The wooden box contained a small silver bracelet, delicate and tarnished with age. A folded piece of paper tucked inside explained that it had belonged to Daniel's mother, my grandmother, who'd passed away before I was born. Rachel wanted you to have it, Richard had written. But Barbara refused. The final item in the envelope was a letter from Rachel. It was written in her careful, looping handwriting, dated a week after I was born. My dearest Natalie, it began. By the time you read this, you'll be older, maybe grown. I hope you've had a good life. I hope the people raising you have loved you the way I couldn't. I was so young when I had you, too young and too scared to do it on my own. Giving you up was the hardest thing I've ever done, but I thought it was the right thing. I thought Barbara and Richard could give you stability, a real home, the things I couldn't provide. I don't know if I made the right choice. I'll probably spend the rest of my life wondering. But I need you to know that I loved you. I love you still. You weren't a mistake. You were the best thing that ever happened to me, even if I wasn't strong enough to keep you. If we ever meet again, I hope you'll let me explain. I hope you'll give me a chance. And if we don't, I hope you'll know that somewhere out there someone is thinking of you. Someone is loving you, even from a distance. The letter ended with her name and a single line. You deserved better than what I could give. I hope you found it. I sat in that small room and cried. Not for Richard but for Rachel. For the young woman who'd made an impossible choice and lived with the weight of it for decades. For the years we'd lost because Barbara had kept these things locked away. For the truth that had been hidden from me, not out of love but out of control. When I finally composed myself, I gathered everything back into the box. The photographs, the letters, the bracelet. I carried it out of the bank and back to my car, holding it like it might dissolve if I wasn't careful. I drove back to the hotel and called Rachel. She answered on the second ring. "Hey honey, how'd it go?" "I found your letter," I said. My voice cracked. "The one you wrote when I was born." There was a long silence. "Oh," she said softly. "Richard kept it. He kept everything. The pictures, the bracelet, all of it. Barbara didn't want me to have any of it, but he held on to it. Just in case." Rachel's breath hitched. "I didn't know if you'd ever see it." "I'm glad you did," I said. "I'm glad I know." We talked for an hour. She told me about the day I was born, about how scared she'd been, about the moment she'd handed me to Barbara and Richard and walked away. She told me about the years she'd spent wondering if I was okay, if I was loved, if I resented her for giving me up. "I don't resent you," I said. "I never did. You did what you thought was right. And you came back. You showed up when it mattered. That's all I ever needed." I flew back to Austin the next day. I didn't go to Richard's funeral. I didn't reach out to Barbara or Derek. I'd gotten what I came for. The truth. The pieces of my history that had been kept from me. And strangely, it was enough. Back in Austin, I showed Elizabeth the contents of the box. She looked through the photographs slowly, her expression soft. "You look like him," she said, holding up the picture of Daniel. "I know," I said. She handed it back. "I'm glad you have this now." "Me too," I said. Over the next few weeks, I thought a lot about Richard. About his apology, his cowardice, the small act of rebellion that was keeping my history safe. It didn't erase the years of neglect. It didn't make him a good father. But it was something. A gesture. An acknowledgement that he'd known he was wrong. And maybe in the end that was all I could ask for. I framed one of the photographs of Daniel and set it on my bookshelf. Not as a shrine but as a reminder. Of where I came from. Of the people who'd loved me even when they couldn't stay. Of the life I'd built in spite of everything. One evening in November, I was sitting on my balcony watching the sunset when my phone rang. It was Amanda. I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Hey," she said. Her voice was tentative. "Hey," I said. "I just wanted to check in," she said. "See how you're doing after everything." "I'm okay," I said. "And you?" She sighed. "I don't know. Mom's not handling things well. Dad's death, the will, all of it. She's angry. At Richard. At you. At everyone." I didn't respond. "I'm sorry," Amanda said. "For how we treated you. I know I've said it before, but I mean it. I know I should have done more. I should have stood up for you." "I appreciate that," I said. "But I don't need you to fix the past. I've made peace with it." She was quiet for a moment. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Are you happy?" "Yes," I said. "I really am." "Good," she said. "That's all I wanted to know." We hung up, and I sat there watching the sky turn from orange to pink to deep purple. I thought. About family. About the one I was born into and the one I'd chosen. About the difference between blood and belonging. And I realized something. I didn't need Barbara or Derek or even Amanda to understand. I didn't need their approval or their apology or their love. I had everything I needed right here. That Thanksgiving, Rachel and Elizabeth and I hosted again. This time we invited more people. Sophia and her girlfriend. Vanessa and her wife. Marcus and Joel. My classmates from grad school. The apartment was full of laughter and warmth, and the smell of roasted vegetables and pie. At one point Rachel raised her glass. "To family," she said. "The kind that shows up." Everyone echoed the toast, and I felt a swell of gratitude so overwhelming I had to blink back tears. Later, after everyone had gone home and Rachel and Elizabeth were washing dishes in the kitchen, I stepped out onto the balcony. The city stretched out below me, glowing and alive. I thought about the girl I used to be. The one who'd sat alone at a restaurant table, waiting for people who never came. The one who'd believed she was the problem. And I thought about the woman I'd become. The one who'd walked away. The one who'd chosen herself. The one who'd built a life worth living. I pulled out my phone and opened my photos. I scrolled until I found the picture of Daniel young and smiling, holding me as a baby. I stared at it for a long moment, then whispered into the night, "I hope I made you proud." The wind carried the words away, and I went back inside to the people who loved me, the people who'd chosen me, the people who were my home. Months passed, then a year. I graduated from my program and started working full-time as a therapist specializing in foster care trauma. I opened a small practice in South Austin, working with kids and teenagers who'd been through systems that had failed them. Every session felt like healing, not just for them but for me. Sophia became one of my success stories. She got her degree, started working at a nonprofit, and called me every few months just to check in. She told me once that I'd saved her life. I told her she'd saved her own. I just reminded her she could. One afternoon in late spring, I got a package in the mail. No return address, just my name and address written in handwriting I didn't recognize. Inside was a small wooden frame and a note. "Thought you might want this. I found it in Dad's things. Amanda." The frame held a photo I'd never seen before. Me at maybe 5 years old, sitting on Richard's lap. He was reading me a book and I was looking up at him with complete trust. It was the only photograph I had of him where he looked like a father. I set it on my shelf next to the picture of Daniel. Not because I'd forgiven everything, but because it was part of my story. And I was done pretending any part of my story didn't exist. That summer, Rachel sold her cottage and sisters. She was done going back and forth, she said. Austin was home now. She found a little house near mine, and we started having weekly dinners, just the two of us. Elizabeth joined when she could, but those nights with Rachel felt sacred. Like we were making up for all the years we'd lost. One evening over pasta and wine, Rachel said, "You know I'm proud of you, right?" "I know," I said. "No," she said. "I mean really proud. You took everything they did to you, all the hurt and the rejection, and you turned it into something beautiful. You help people. You show up. You chose love over bitterness. That takes strength most people don't have." I felt my throat tighten. "I learned from you." She shook her head. "You did that yourself, kiddo." By the time fall arrived, I'd been in Austin for 3 years. 3 years of building a life that felt real solid, mine. I had my practice. I had my people. I had a future that looked nothing like my past. And I was grateful for all of it. One October evening, I was walking along the lake when I got a call from an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I answered. "Hello?" There was a pause. "Natalie?" It was Barbara. My stomach dropped. "Yeah," I said. "I wasn't sure you'd answer," she said. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered, tired. "What do you want, Barbara?" "I just wanted to talk," she said. "To tell you that I've been thinking about everything. About how I treated you. About the things I said." "I don't know that there's anything to say," I said. "I know," she said. "But I needed to try. I'm sorry, Natalie. For all of it. I'm sorry I couldn't be the mother you needed." The apology hung in the air between us. Part of me wanted to hang up. Part of me wanted to scream. But mostly I just felt tired. "I appreciate that," I said finally. "But it doesn't change anything." "I know," she said. "I just needed you to hear it." We hung up. And I stood there by the water, watching the sun set. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel vindication. I just felt done. And that, I realized, was its own kind of freedom. That night I went home and wrote in my journal, something I'd started doing in grad school. I wrote about Barbara's call. About Richard's letter. About the life I'd built and the people who'd helped me build it. And I wrote about forgiveness. Not the kind that required reconciliation, but the kind that meant letting go. I forgave them, I wrote. Not because they deserved it, but because I deserve peace. I closed the journal and set it aside. Then I called Elizabeth. "Want to grab dinner tomorrow?" I asked. "Always," she said. "How about Rachel's place?" "I'll bring wine." "Perfect," I said. The next evening, the three of us sat around Rachel's table, laughing over stories and passing dishes. At one point, Elizabeth raised her glass. "To second chances," she said. Rachel and I raised ours. "To second chances." And as I looked around the table at the two women who'd become my family, I realized something. I'd spent so much of my life searching for a place to belong. But I'd had it all along. It wasn't a place. It wasn't a house or a city or a last name. It was this. People who chose me. People who showed up. People who loved me not because they had to, but because they wanted to. And that was more than enough. It was everything. As the evening wore on and the conversation flowed easy and warm, I felt something I'd never felt before. Complete. Whole. Home. Not in the place I was born or the place I was raised, but in the life I'd chosen. In the family I'd built. In the woman I'd become. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't waiting for anything. I was just here. Living. Loving. Free. And that was the greatest gift I'd ever received. The invitation arrived in March, 3 years after I'd left Portland for good. It came via certified mail, which meant someone wanted to make sure I received it. I signed for the thick envelope and carried it upstairs to my apartment, setting it on the kitchen counter while I made coffee. The return address was from a law firm in Seattle, not one I recognized. I opened it carefully, pulling out an embossed card and several folded documents. The card was an invitation to a memorial service. In loving memory of Barbara Jean Brooks, who passed peacefully on March 2nd surrounded by family. A celebration of life will be held on March 25th at Evergreen Memorial Gardens in Bend, Oregon. All who knew her are welcome to attend. I read it twice, then set it down. Barbara was dead. The woman who'd raised me, resented me, and ultimately released me from any obligation to keep trying was gone. I felt the same strange emptiness I'd felt when Richard died. That hollow acknowledgement of a connection severed. I looked through the other documents. One was a formal notice that I'd been named in Barbara's will, though the details wouldn't be shared until after the service. The other was a handwritten note from Amanda. Natalie, I know this is complicated. I'm not expecting you to come, but I wanted you to know. Mom changed a lot in her last year. She talked about you sometimes. I think she had regrets. Whether or not you believe that is up to you. If you do come, I'd like to see you. If you don't, I understand. Amanda. I called Rachel first. She was at a pottery class but stepped outside to take my call. Barbara died, I said without preamble. There was a pause. How are you feeling? She asked. I don't know, I admitted. Numb, I guess. Are you thinking about going to the service? Maybe, I said. I don't know if I should. There's no should, Rachel said gently. Only what feels right for you. I spent the next week turning it over in my mind. I talked to Elizabeth about it during one of our regular coffee meetups. She listened without judgment, asking questions that helped me clarify my own thoughts. What would going give you? She asked. Closure, maybe, I said. Or confirmation that I made the right choice. And what would not going give you? Peace, I said. The ability to move forward without looking back. She smiled. Sounds like you already know what you want. But I didn't. Part of me wanted to see it through, to stand at Barbara's grave and acknowledge that she'd been part of my story, even if that part had been painful. Another part of me wanted to let it go entirely, to refuse to give her any more of my time or energy, even in death. In the end, I decided to go. Not for Barbara, and not for the family I'd left behind, but for myself. I needed to see this chapter close completely, to stand in that space one last time and walk away knowing I'd given it everything I could. I booked a flight for the day before the service and told Rachel and Elizabeth my decision. Both offered to come with me, but I declined. This was something I needed to do alone. The flight to Oregon was uneventful. I rented a car and drove to Bend in silence, the landscape achingly familiar. The high desert stretched out on either side of the highway, the mountains rising in the distance, the same view I'd seen dozens of times growing up. It should have felt like coming home, but it didn't. It felt like visiting a museum of my own past, detached and distant. I checked into the same hotel I'd stayed at when Richard died. The woman at the front desk didn't recognize me, which was a relief. I spent the evening in my room, ordering takeout and watching mindless television, trying not to think too much about the next day. The memorial service was held at a cemetery on the outskirts of town, a sprawling expanse of green lawn and granite headstones. I arrived early and sat in my car watching people trickle in. I recognized some of them. Distant relatives, family friends, people from Barbara's church. Derek arrived with his wife and 2 young kids. Amanda came alone, dressed in black, her face pale and drawn. I waited until most people had gone inside before I got out of the car and walked toward the chapel. The service was traditional. A pastor who'd known Barbara for years spoke about her dedication to her family, her volunteer work at the church, her love of gardening. He painted a picture of a woman I barely recognized, Someone warm and generous and devoted. It wasn't a lie exactly, but it was incomplete. It was the version of Barbara that existed for other people, not the one I'd known. Derek spoke next, his voice steady but strained. He talked about growing up with Barbara as a mother, about the sacrifices she'd made, the lessons she'd taught him. He didn't mention me. Amanda spoke last. Her voice wavered, and she paused several times to collect herself. She talked about Barbara's strength, her resilience, the way she'd held the family together, even when things were hard. And then, unexpectedly, she said my mother wasn't perfect. She made mistakes and she knew it. In her last months, she talked about the things she wished she'd done differently, the people she wished she'd treated better. She wasn't always easy to love, but she loved us in the way she knew how. It was the closest anyone came to acknowledging the complexity of who Barbara had been. After the service, people gathered outside for the burial. I stood at the back of the crowd, far enough away that I could leave quietly if I needed to. As they lowered the casket into the ground, I felt nothing. No sadness, no relief, just a quiet acknowledgement that this part of my life was truly over. As people began to disperse, Amanda found me. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, her shoulders hunched. "Thanks for coming," she said. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "I know," she said. "But I'm glad you did." We stood in awkward silence for a moment. "How have you been?" she asked. "Good," I said. "Really good." She nodded. "I'm happy for you." She glanced back toward Derek, who was talking to a group of relatives. "I should get back," she said. "But there's something I need to tell you. Mom left you something. In her will." I frowned. "What?" "I don't know the details," Amanda said. "The lawyer will contact you. But she wanted you to have it. Whatever it is." She paused. I think it was her way of apologizing. I didn't know what to say. Amanda gave me a small sad smile. "Take care of yourself, Natalie." "You too," I said. She walked away, and I stood there for a moment longer, looking at the fresh grave. Then I turned and walked back to my car without looking back. The lawyer called 2 days later while I was back in Austin. His name was Gregory Marsh, and he had the same formal, detached tone as the attorney who'd handled Richard's estate. "Ms. Brooks," he said. "I'm calling regarding the estate of Barbara Brooks. As you may know, you've been named as a beneficiary." "What did she leave me?" I asked. "A trust fund," he said. "Established in your name shortly after you were placed with the Brooks family. It's been accruing interest for 27 years. The current value is approximately $340,000. I nearly dropped the phone. "What?" "Mrs. Brooks also left a letter," he continued. "I can mail it to you, or you can pick it up from our office if you prefer." "Mail it," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The letter arrived a week later. I stared at the envelope for an entire evening before I could bring myself to open it. When I finally did, I found 3 pages written in Barbara's neat, careful handwriting. The letter was dated 2 months before she died. "Natalie," it began. "I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't expect you to understand. But I need you to know the truth, even if it's too late to matter. When Richard and I took you in, it wasn't out of love. It was out of obligation. Rachel was my sister and she was desperate, and I thought I could give you a better life than she could. But I resented her for asking. I resented you for existing. I resented the fact that I couldn't have children of my own, and here was this baby I hadn't asked for, reminding me of my failure every single day. That's not your fault. It was never your fault. But I couldn't see that at the time. I couldn't separate my anger at the situation from my responsibility to you. And so I failed you. I gave you food and shelter, but I withheld the love you deserved. I made you feel like a burden when you were just a child trying to survive. The trust fund was my way of trying to do something right," she continued. "I set it up the year you came to live with us, putting away a little money each month. It was the one thing I could give you that felt like an apology, even if I couldn't say the words out loud. I know money doesn't fix what I did, but I hope it helps. I hope you use it to build the life you deserve, the one I couldn't give you." The letter ended with a simple line. "I'm sorry, Natalie. I wish I'd been better." I read the letter 3 times, then set it down and stared out the window. I didn't know how to feel. Angry that she'd waited until death to apologize? Grateful that she'd left me something tangible? Sad that she'd carried that guilt for so many years without ever saying anything? Maybe all of it. Maybe none of it. I called Rachel and read her the letter over the phone. She was quiet for a long time. That sounds like Barbara, she said finally. Too proud to apologize in life but willing to try in death. Do you think she meant it? I asked. I think she meant it as much as she was capable of, Rachel said. Whether that's enough is up to you. I thought about it for weeks. The money sat in the trust untouched, while I tried to decide what it meant. Was it an apology? A bribe? A final attempt at control? Eventually, I realized it didn't matter. Barbara was gone. Her intentions, her regrets, her reasons, none of it could hurt me anymore. What mattered was what I chose to do with it. I decided to use part of the money to expand my practice. I rented a bigger office space, hired an associate therapist, and started a scholarship fund for kids aging out of foster care who wanted to pursue higher education. It felt right, using something born out of guilt and obligation to create opportunities for people who'd been failed by the system. The rest I saved, a safety net I'd never had growing up. A cushion that meant I'd never have to depend on anyone else for my survival. One evening, I sat down with Elizabeth and Rachel and told them about my decision. They both nodded approvingly. That's beautiful, Elizabeth said. You're taking something painful and turning it into something good. That's healing. Rachel raised her glass. To turning pain into purpose. We clinked glasses and I felt a sense of peace I hadn't expected. Barbara's apology, such as it was, didn't erase the past. But it allowed me to move forward without the weight of wondering if she'd ever understood what she'd done. Summer came and with it new clients, new challenges, new growth. Sophia stopped by my office one afternoon to tell me she'd gotten engaged. She showed me the ring, her face glowing with happiness. I wanted you to be one of the first to know, she said. You helped me believe I deserved this. You did that yourself, I reminded her. But I'm honored you thought of me. That fall, I was invited to speak at a conference on foster care and family trauma. It was my first time presenting to a large audience and I was terrified. But when I stood at that podium and looked out at the hundreds of faces, therapists and social workers and advocates, I felt a surge of purpose. I told my story. Not all of it, but enough. I talked about the damage that comes from feeling unwanted, the importance of chosen family, the possibility of healing even after profound hurt. When I finished, the room erupted in applause. Afterwards, dozens of people came up to thank me, to share their own stories, to tell me I'd given them hope. It was one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. That Thanksgiving we hosted again. By now it had become a tradition, our chosen family gathering around Rachel's table or mine, sharing food and stories and gratitude. This year we added new faces. A colleague from my practice and her partner. A teenager I'd been working with who had nowhere else to go. A neighbor who'd recently moved to Austin and didn't know anyone yet. The table was full, overflowing even, and the noise was beautiful. At one point Rachel stood and raised her glass. I just want to say, she began, that I'm grateful for all of you. For this family we've built. For the love we've chosen to give each other. She looked at me. And I'm especially grateful for this one. Who taught me that family isn't about blood. It's about showing up. Everyone raised their glasses and I felt tears prick my eyes. Thank you, I said to the room. For being here. For choosing me. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and the dishes were washed, I stood on my balcony and looked out at the city. I thought about the girl I used to be, the one who'd circled a date on a calendar and hoped desperately that someone would show up for her. And I thought about the woman I'd become. The one who didn't need anyone to show up because she'd learned to show up for herself. I thought about Barbara's apology and Richard's cowardice and Rachel's sacrifice. I thought about Daniel, the father I'd never known, and Elizabeth, the family I'd found by accident. I thought about all the ways I'd been hurt and all the ways I'd healed. And I realized something. My story wasn't about them anymore. It wasn't about the people who'd failed me or the ways I'd been broken. It was about what I'd built in spite of it all. A life worth living. A family worth keeping. A future worth fighting for. I pulled out my phone and opened my notes app. I started typing, letting the words flow without overthinking them. This is for anyone who's ever felt unwanted, I wrote. For anyone who's ever believed they were the problem. You're not. You never were. The people who couldn't love you, who couldn't see you, who couldn't make space for you, that's their failure, not yours. And you don't have to keep carrying it. You can walk away. You can build something new. You can choose yourself. And when you do, You'll find that the family you need has been waiting for you all along. Not in the place you expected. Not in the people you thought. But in the ones who show up. The ones who stay. The ones who choose you back. I saved the note and set my phone down. The city lights shimmered below me, and the air was cool and clear. I took a deep breath and smiled, because I was finally completely undeniably free. And that freedom tasted like home. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.